What would you do if you walked into a luxury store and were looked down upon just because of your appearance? But what if you were actually the owner of that very place? Victor Harlan, a successful billionaire behind the Harlan's Luxe luxury store empire, decides to disguise himself as an ordinary customer to inspect the quality of service at his own store. However, he never expected that instead of receiving a warm welcome, he would face disdain and outright discrimination from the store manager, Mark Donovan. Sharp words, condescending looks, and outright rejection ignited a pivotal decision. Victor would not only expose Mark, but also initiate a complete overhaul. Can Victor transform the face of this store? What secrets will be revealed? And will Mark truly regret his actions when it's already too late? Don't take your eyes off this video, because this story isn't just about a luxury store. It's a profound lesson about self-respect, respect for others, and how we treat one another. Victor Harlan is not easily swayed by praise or the glamour of the luxury stores he owns. Though he is the owner of the Harlan's Luxe chain, which specializes in providing the most luxurious goods, he often feels that there is a great distance between him and his real customers. The meetings at fancy parties, tense trading sessions, and business strategy consultations have left him exhausted, without any sense of closeness or sincerity. Victor realizes that he cannot continue his work solely based on financial reports. He wants to understand more about the luxury shoppers he serves, the people who contribute to the success of Harlan's Luxe. So he decides to shake things up, a decision that surprises even those inside the company. That morning, Victor wears a simple, unremarkable outfit and drives a normal car, not the luxury vehicle he typically uses. He wants to see how the staff will treat a regular customer, someone he doesn't know. He doesn't want to judge them based on conversations with the manager, but by their natural reactions. When he enters the store, a wave of unfamiliarity washes over him. Everything is luxurious, from the warm yellow lighting to the expensive art on the walls, all reflecting the sophistication Victor had carefully crafted. However, as he passes the cashier, something feels off. He can't put it into words, but he senses a coldness, an invisible distance between the staff and the customers. Victor stops near a luxury watch display where a man is examining a gold-plated silver watch. The clerk standing next to him eyes Victor coldly, as if waiting for him to leave. Before Victor can say anything, a stern voice rings out, "Hello, can I help you?" The man behind the counter, Mark Donovan, the store manager for the day, doesn't seem welcoming at all. "Just looking," Victor replies, trying to keep his composure. Mark scans him up and down, his gaze disdainful, as though Victor doesn't belong in this space. "We don't have items suited for every customer. If you need something more affordable, you can try another store." Victor is stunned. This is an attitude he never expected from a manager in his own store. He tries to stay calm, but disappointment rises within him. He can't believe what he's just heard. But what puzzles him even more are the reactions of the other clerks. They remain silent, none of them daring to speak up against Mark. The fearful looks only make the situation worse. Victor stands still for a moment, observing. Mark continues, his voice cold. "You must not be the type of customer we serve. We cater to those who can afford the best. If you have any needs, I'd be happy to refer you to another department." "Is that so?" Victor smiles faintly. "I'll be back later." With newfound determination, he walks out of the store, not because of Mark's insult, but because he realizes there is a bigger issue beneath the surface of the glamorous facade he's built. The employees are not just disrespectful, they don't understand the value of serving every customer, regardless of who they are. Victor is determined not to let this problem persist. He will not only learn more, but he will do whatever it takes to change how the store operates. This is just the beginning of a much larger battle. Victor never imagined that frustration would drive him to return with an even harder attitude. But that's exactly how he felt when he walked into Harlan's Luxe for the second time. He realized that the conversation he'd had earlier wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a clear sign of deep-seated discrimination, something he could not ignore. This time, he didn't hide behind his usual expensive clothes. He chose a simple shirt, no longer feeling the need to blend in. As he walked into the store, he made sure to look directly at the employees working, but none of them recognized him as the owner. Victor strolled past the display cases, his gaze lingering on the luxury items, but his heart no longer swelled with the same excitement as before. He wasn't here for shopping. He was searching for something else, an answer to the emptiness he'd felt the last time. And then fate seemed to test him again. Mark Donovan appeared, his cold demeanor unchanged. He approached Victor and quickly scanned him up and down. "Hello, can I help you?" Mark asked, his tone indifferent and void of any warmth. Victor walked up to the counter, smiling faintly but not rushing to respond. "I want to buy a watch," he said, his voice steady. Mark eyed him again, his expression full of disdain. "Ah, I see. Looking for a cheap watch or just browsing for inspiration?" His voice was cold, with a slight mocking edge. Victor ignored the mockery, his calm unwavering. He pointed to a gold-plated watch priced at nearly $10,000. "I'll take this one," he replied. Mark glanced at the watch, then back at Victor, a sarcastic smile playing on his lips. "You can try it on, but I don't think you'll be able to afford it." Victor felt a flash of anger but maintained his composure. He didn't take his eyes off Mark, letting a long silence stretch between them. The tension in the air was palpable. Then a soft voice from behind broke the standoff. Rachel, one of the other employees, was watching from a distance. She had always been polite and welcoming to customers, but today she seemed hesitant. Her eyes were filled with worry, but also uncertainty, unsure whether to intervene. Victor sensed her hesitation, but he wouldn't show weakness. He smiled, not happily, but with a firm resolve. "I don't need to explain my finances to you, but as an employee here, it's probably important to know who your customers are, right?" Mark didn't answer. Instead, he locked eyes with Victor, his gaze challenging. The silence between them was thick. Finally, Mark spoke, his voice sharp. "You don't deserve to buy this. We don't cater to people who don't understand its value." Victor couldn't believe what he was hearing. He stepped closer to Mark, closing the gap. "I want to buy this watch," he said, his voice low and cold, "and I'll pay for it right now, but there's something more important you need to understand." Mark, still standing his ground, looked into Victor's eyes, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. "You can't do anything here," he said firmly. Victor stared at him for a moment, then said with quiet authority, "You'll soon find out who has the power here." Without another word, Victor turned and walked out of the store. Mark stood there, still trying to process what had just happened. He knew something bigger was coming, but he hadn't expected this. As Victor walked out, he couldn't help but smile. He knew he had done the right thing. He let disrespect win. More importantly, he realized that what he faced today was just the beginning of a much larger journey, a fight to protect the store's reputation and to make a real difference in how people treated one another. Victor decided that silence was no longer an option. His confrontation with Mark had opened a door he could not close. He could no longer allow this kind of discrimination to persist in his store. More importantly, he realized that this wasn't just a problem with one person. It was a systemic issue, a system that had allowed contempt and discrimination to fester for far too long. Now it was time for a change. The next day, Victor called an emergency meeting at Harlan's Lux headquarters, a meeting Mark could never have predicted. Some of Victor's assistants had been briefed on the meeting, but no one knew exactly what to expect. Everything had been meticulously planned, but a tense atmosphere hung in the air. Mark had no idea he would be the center of attention. As he entered the conference room, an ominous feeling rose in his chest, but he tried to remain calm. When he sat across from Victor, he had no idea this confrontation would be anything more than a simple discussion. Victor stared at him steadily, no longer holding back his sarcasm or subtle jabs. His eyes were cold, filled with steely determination. "Mark," Victor began, his voice steady, "yesterday I walked into your store disguised as a regular customer. I wanted to test the level of service and respect that our customers receive. What I witnessed was disappointing." Mark shifted uncomfortably, but his worry became evident as Victor continued. "I saw how you treated a regular customer," Victor went on. "You seem to think that people who aren't upper class aren't worthy of respect or of what our store offers." Mark immediately tried to defend himself. "It's not like that, Mr. Harlan. It's just that Victor cut him off. "It doesn't matter, Mark. Not only did you insult a customer, but you also insulted the very values I've built over the years." Mark sat in stunned silence, not sure how to respond, but there was no denying that Victor's words carried weight. I've tried to keep things under control, Victor continued, his voice devoid of warmth. But you've made me realize something. If we keep going down this path, everything I've built will collapse. Mark's face grew pale. I don't I don't want to ruin anything, Mr. Harlan. Victor didn't respond immediately. He stood up and walked to the window, watching the light rain fall outside. The room seemed to grow colder. After a long pause, he turned to face Mark, his voice firm and cold. You didn't just damage our customer relationships, Mark. You tarnished the very value of this brand. And that's something I can't tolerate. I can't let someone like you continue to be a part of this company. Mark's face registered shock. You can't do this, he almost pleaded. I've worked for this company for so many years. Not anymore, Victor interrupted, his eyes unwavering. You're fired. You will no longer work for Harlan's Lux. At that moment, Mark lost his composure. He stood up, rage and frustration clear on his face. You'll regret this decision, I guarantee it. Victor met his anger with an unsympathetic gaze. I don't think so, Mark. I don't regret standing up for my values. Mark stormed out of the room, not once looking back. The door slammed shut, leaving behind a heavy silence. Victor remained standing, letting out a sigh. He knew this was just the first step in a long journey, but he couldn't allow one bad apple to spoil the bunch. What he had done wasn't just for the store, it was for everything Harlan's Lux stood for. He had the courage to face the problem head on. Victor stood in his office, a cup of coffee in hand, staring out at the early morning light filtering through the tall buildings. His anxiety hadn't eased, despite his decision to begin restructuring Harlan's Lux. Everything had been turned upside down, from the staff's attitude to the way the store presented itself to customers. But one thing was certain, he couldn't let the mistakes of the past determine the future. The first person who came to mind was Sophie Matthews. It wasn't because she was someone he could easily delegate authority to, but because of the qualities she had shown over the years. Sophie wasn't an exceptional employee in terms of high-profile achievements, but her dedication, patience, and respect for customers had earned her Victor's trust. While other employees, under Mark's leadership, had been cold and dismissive, Sophie was always attentive, helping customers with genuine concern. Sophie wasn't just an employee. She understood the value of building a brand for the long term, not just through expensive products, but also through how customers were treated. Her humility and sense of responsibility had caught Victor's attention from the very start. When Sophie entered Victor's office, she showed no signs of nervousness. Despite knowing that this meeting could change the course of her career, she remained calm. She was no stranger to challenges, but the thought of being summoned to Victor's office still made her uneasy. Victor raised his eyes to meet hers. His expression wasn't gentle, but firm with clear determination. He gestured for Sophie to sit down before beginning the conversation. Sophie, Victor said, his voice steady, I've been watching your work for a while now, and I believe you're the person who can help turn this store around. Sophie was taken aback, unsure how to respond. You want me to be store manager? She asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and surprise. Victor nodded, without hesitation. We need more than just quick fixes. We need someone with vision, someone who respects both our customers and employees. You've shown that you can do that. You've proven you won't give up easily, and I've seen you put the long-term success of the store ahead of short-term gains. Sophie stepped back, internally processing the weight of his words. She knew Victor was observant, and now he had finally acknowledged her worth. But she couldn't help feeling a bit nervous. I'm not sure I'm up for the task, she admitted. Victor didn't show pity. His gaze remained steady, without hesitation. You've demonstrated patience, responsibility, and sincerity. Those are the qualities I value. And I believe that if you're determined to make a difference, you can do it. Victor stood and walked toward the window, gazing out into the city. Sophie, this store needs a leader who isn't just talented, but also compassionate and resolute. You're not someone who gives in easily, and that's why I've chosen you. You understand the customers, and more importantly, you know how to foster a respectful and inclusive work environment. Sophie felt the weight of the responsibility, but a sense of pride also filled her. She nodded. determined to take on the challenge. "I'll do my best," she said, her voice firm with resolve. "I won't let you down." Victor turned back to her, his expression softening slightly, but still filled with determination. "I believe in you, Sophie. Don't let me down." As time passed, Sophie's training sessions began to create noticeable changes in the attitudes and work habits of the employees at Harlan's Lux. Although not everyone was receptive to change, passionate employees like Sophie slowly convinced the rest. Each training session was a challenge for Sophie, but she never backed down. She knew it was impossible to change an entire team overnight, but if she persevered and taught them step by step, the transformation would come. "We don't just sell products, we sell an experience. An experience customers will remember forever," Sophie said, standing at the front, her eyes sharp and determined, like a warrior leading her army. The employees exchanged skeptical looks. Many were still uncertain, but Sophie didn't mind. She knew she had to set an example and live up to her words. In each session, she presented real-life situations that made the staff reconsider how they had treated customers in the past and how they could do better moving forward. One of the most important lessons Sophie emphasized was respecting all customers, regardless of their ability to pay. "If a customer can't buy the expensive items we sell, it's not their failure," Sophie said, her voice filled with conviction. "It's our failure to create a meaningful experience." A week later, the change began to show. Employees who had previously been indifferent to lower end customers were starting to shift their attitudes. One employee, Lucas, who had stood out under Mark's leadership, showed a clear change in his approach to work. "Sophie, I think I finally get what you've been saying in the training sessions," Lucas said, his voice sincere. "I never thought I could help customers who couldn't afford the high end stuff, but now I see that my job is to make sure they have a great experience, whether they buy anything or not." Sophie smiled, seeing the transformation in Lucas's eyes. "Exactly, Lucas. Keep it up. Respect and dedication to our customers are what we need to keep going." Then, one exciting morning, Harlan's Lux welcomed a special customer, Mrs. Thompson, a longtime patron. She came in to buy a high-end handbag worth more than $15,000. It wasn't her first visit, but this time she was impressed by the store's transformation. "Since I first came here, I've never felt more comfortable," Mrs. Thompson said, smiling with satisfaction. "The staff here really care about me now, not just because I can afford it, but because I'm their customer. I feel welcome." Sophie stood nearby, listening to Mrs. Thompson's compliment. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was the clearest proof of the changes she had worked so hard to make. But Sophie knew that this story wasn't about one customer. It was part of a larger, ongoing process, a transformation of the entire team. The following week, the changes became even more evident. Customers began to notice a marked difference in the way they were treated. People who had once felt uncomfortable entering the store due to the staff's discriminatory attitudes now felt welcome, invited not just by the products, but by the warmth and friendliness of the team. Victor noticed the transformation when he visited the store one afternoon. He observed from a distance, keeping his presence hidden. Things had changed significantly. Sophie had done what he had hoped. When Sophie stepped out to meet him, her eyes were no longer as timid. She knew the road ahead was still full of challenges, but she was on the right track. More importantly, she had proven herself worthy of Victor's trust. "We still have a long way to go, but I'm very pleased with what we've achieved," Victor said, his eyes filled with satisfaction and trust. "Keep up the good work." Sophie nodded, her heart filled with determination. She knew that no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, she would not back down. As Sophie looked at the customer feedback board this week, she couldn't help but smile. Compliments about the change in service attitudes were appearing more and more. Harlan's Lux was no longer a place of aloofness and disdain, but a welcoming space where every customer felt respected, regardless of their financial situation. Though Sophie knew she was on the right track, a sense of worry lingered. The changes in staff attitudes and improvements in customer service were positive steps, but she understood that a store couldn't sustain long-term success based on initial feedback alone. She needed to ensure that the improvements were maintained and continuously built upon. One day, Sophie received a Special piece of feedback from Mrs. Jenkins, a former customer. She had shopped at Harlan's Lux for years, but had always felt uncomfortable with the cold attitude of the staff, especially when she was just browsing and had no intention of buying. We've noticed a big change in the way the staff treats customers. They really care about us, and that feeling is truly appreciated, Mrs. Jenkins wrote in her letter. I want to thank Sophie and the team for creating a wonderful shopping experience. You not only sell expensive items, but also offer a feeling I've never experienced anywhere else. Sophie felt great joy as she read those words. It wasn't just a compliment, it was an acknowledgement of the hard work she and her team had put in. It only fueled her determination to keep improving the quality of customer service. When Victor walked into the store one morning, he also felt the difference. He observed from a distance, keeping his presence unnoticed. The staff were working diligently, engaging with customers with enthusiasm and attentiveness that had been nearly absent before. He noticed Lucas, once one of the most indifferent employees under Mark, now enthusiastically consulting a female customer. He didn't just introduce products, he patiently listened to her requests, explaining the materials and how to care for them. Victor moved closer, watching for a while. The atmosphere in the store was completely different now. There was no tension between the staff and customers. Instead, a comfortable, pleasant energy filled the space. Sophie had achieved what she had set out to do, creating a store that was not only luxurious but also warm and inviting. When Sophie stepped out of the office and saw Victor, she nodded slightly to greet him. Though she felt a twinge of nervousness, the determined look in her eyes remained unchanged. "You're doing a great job," Victor said, his voice full of recognition. "We're on the right track. I've seen a difference, not just in the feedback, but in the way the staff are performing." Sophie smiled, feeling a wave of relief. "Thank you, Victor, but we still have a lot of work to do. We can't be complacent with the initial changes." Victor nodded, his eyes sharp as ever. "Yes, things need to be maintained and continue evolving. You've led a major change, but don't forget, there's always pressure to keep improving. This store has to be a model of excellence." As the days went on, Sophie grew more confident in her leadership. While there were still challenges, she knew that if she persevered, she could build a strong team and a sustainable store. One late afternoon, when the store was almost empty, Sophie received an unexpected call. On the other end of the line was Mrs. Thompson, one of the store's most valued customers. She had shopped there many times, but today she called to thank Sophie for the wonderful shopping experience. "Sophie, I just wanted to call and say that not only was the product great, but the attitude and care of the staff made me feel appreciated. You've created a space I want to keep coming back to," Mrs. Thompson said, her voice warm and sincere. Sophie felt a deep sense of emotion. This was a compliment she would never forget. She knew that all her efforts had truly paid off.